Now I'll leave you with Rebecca Gonzalez.
Good morning. So, since this is my first time speaking here, I thought I'd introduce myself, but with a twist. I'm going to introduce myself in two ways, and you have to tell me which one is better. Number one, hi, I'm Rebecca. I live on the Gold Coast. I get lost a lot. I speak before thinking, that's it. And I am a Christian. Option two. So about 70 people at this conference I went to last week. So the first meal was full of getting to know people, introducing myself, them introducing themselves, and to be honest, all the names just went in one ear and out the other. So I sat down for lunch, and I introduced myself to this girl, and she said her name, to which I replied, to be honest, I probably won't remember that. And her face dropped, and she said, And I was really embarrassed, and I said, it's not that I don't want to remember your name, it's just that I can't. There's so many names, I've tried so hard. But I was just digging myself a deeper hole, and it was really embarrassing. We became good friends, but I couldn't forget. A little later, first there's one thing you should know about me. I have inherited an uncanny ability to get myself lost in any situation. Seriously, I use a GPS whenever possible. I heard there's a GPS app for the uni I'll be going to, so I've already downloaded it because I'm sure if I didn't have it, you'd find me in some corner just trying to find the library. So a little later during this conference, I was at morning tea, and I was with my friend, and I had a muffin that I'd bought earlier that day, and I'd left it in my room, and I needed to go get it. And so I was like, do you know the quickest way to get to my room? And she's like, yeah, I think I do. It's out there to the right. So I ventured out, daring, adventurous me, and I went outside to the door on the right. I went in, and I was going into this door. Usually there's like a tag thing that you have to tap, and then you can go in. But someone else was coming out, and it was actually one of the speakers. So I didn't have to tap my thing on the lock. I just spoke to him. I said, hi, how's it going? I'm really enjoying your presentations. And he was really awkward. He kind of didn't want to speak to me, looking down a lot, and so he just left. And I was like, I'm just going to keep going. I've got my muffin at the other side of it. So I went up the stairs, got up to the top floor, and when I got there, I realized this was not my room. This was not where my rooms were. This was a completely different building, of which I knew nothing of. It must have been the speaker's building. So went downstairs, raced the long way to my room, went through a construction zone I wasn't supposed to and got told so by the receptionist. And then I finally made it to my room. Then on the way back, guess who I run into again? This awkward speaker. I really began to question the worth and whether getting my muffin was worth all of this trouble. But as soon as I bit into it, I forgave all. Now, which option do you think was easier to get to know me by? The list or the story? I'd like to say that the story, although messy, portrayed a fuller version of who I really am. We've forgotten the importance of story, and instead we've become obsessed with being precise and concise. So, why are stories important? Stories are how we make sense of people and how we make sense of the world. Think of the saying, walk a mile in their shoes. What it's actually saying is you need to enter into somebody's story and get to know them and understand it to get to know them. Think of ancient civilizations. They created massive meta-narratives to make sense of the world they lived in. And we do too. Stories are a core part of our society and are built into our DNA. Story is also an integral part of our identity. Someone once told me, you can't answer the question, what should I do, unless you answered the question, what story am I a part of? What story do you live in? What story are you sold? This is an extremely important question to think about because your development of character is actually based on the stories that have captivated you. Again, you might be saying, that's great, haha, but what? But don't let me lose you now. You see, this is much more relevant than you think. The Bible is a story. It's a big story. It's God's story. It's the biggest story ever because it spans across all of time and space and across the entire universe. And at its climax or epitome is the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. It's a story of how God entered into our broken story so that we can know him better. Now, as I said earlier, you can't know God through just a list of attributes. You know him by knowing his story. And as an additional point, you should not look back in your life and see God in your story. You should look back on your life and see your story in God's. To answer that story on the relevance of his story, I actually have to tell another story, and it's in Luke 24:13-25. Jesus has died, everyone is depressed, everyone is confused. You'd hoped that this was the one, but obviously it wasn't because, well, he was dead. So, as two disciples trudge their way back home, they're confused to hear that the person they've been traveling with hasn't actually heard of what has happened. So they fill him in and listen to what he replies in verse 25-27. Then Jesus said to them, "You foolish people, your dull minds keep you from believing all that the prophets talked about. Wasn't it necessary for the Christ to suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then he interpreted for them the things written about himself in all the scriptures, starting with Moses and going through all the prophets. You know what he did? He told them a story. He told them their story. He reminded them of his faithfulness throughout time, his unending, extravagant love that knew no bounds, his Father's plan for him, and the significance of what he had done. Jesus was actually the unanticipated, confusing, and extraordinary culmination of their story and our story. You see, like the woman at the well, this storytelling, being reminded of your story, opened their eyes, and actually it made their hearts burn. We're not our hearts burning, they say. God's story changes things. Your story changes things. So we see in both these cases, the woman and the well and these two disciples, there's a race back to town and a proclamation of their story to anyone who would hear. And let me tell you, word did spread fast. So what does this all mean? How does it relate to you? Well, it's simple. We're all a part of the story, God's story. Live as a beacon of life and a reflection of the story that you belong to. Go into the whole world and proclaim the good news to every creature, so that hopefully at the end of the day, they can say, "Were not our hearts burning?" and go racing back to the arms of the one who told them everything they ever did. That's my story, that's our story, and that's God's story.
To help you understand God's Word in a whole new way, go to goodnewsunlimited.com. You can sign up there to get your free devotional delivered to you each day. This program has been paid for by the partners and friends of Good News Unlimited. Word spreads fast.